Hello and welcome to Script to Stage for A Fine Balance. Every week leading up to the opening night of A Fine Balance at Q Theatre, we'll be sitting down with the makers behind Auckland Theatre Company and Prayas Theatre's season to chat about the world of the play and the creatives behind it. I am Sananda Chatterjee, Assistant Director for A Fine Balance. And this week we have Amit Ohdedar, who's the Prayas producer and cultural and historical advisor. Hi, Amit Uncle, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you, Sananda.
So for the benefit of everybody else, because I already know this, can you please give us a little bit of your background and Prayas?
Right. Prayas, as you know, was established in 2005. So this is our 14th year running. So we do Indian plays in English for the wider audience in New Zealand. And our goal was to spread a minority culture to a wider audience in New Zealand. I am the founding member and president of Prayas, and I have, in the initial years, directed many plays until you guys took over, the likes of you and Ahi, who have shared the burden.
Yeah.
And the last one being, I directed with you Dara last year.
Yeah, that was quite momentous for us,
Absolutely.
wasn't it? Like, finally the chela and the guru worked together.
Absolutely.
Which is the student and the teacher. Amit Uncle, we did this play in 2015, and it was really successful for us and quite momentous at that time. So why now are we doing this play?
Well, I think as a play, it is very strong. Mm-hmm. And as you know, the play is based on Rohinton Mistry's epic novel by the same name. And it covers a period in the modern Indian history which affected so many people. And there are lessons to be taken from the play or from the story as such, because that was the only time when India's democracy was in severe threat. India is the largest democracy in the modern world. And at that point in time, in 1975, Indian constitution was suspended.
Right.
Civil liberties curtailed. Mm-hmm. Press censorship ever in India has faced, where newspapers were blackened and huge amount of pressure censorship was done. Apart from various other excesses we can talk about.
Yeah.
So there is a strong relevance of that story to be told to a wider audience.
Yeah.
So that's when ATC approached us, especially Lynn Cardy, who saw our play, our work, and found this good moving story to be told as a joint production to a wider audience. So that's been basically the motivation.
The Fine Balance is set in a time of India's history when Indira Gandhi declares a state of emergency. And the reason she cites, and this is a copy of the declaration, and this is what it says. So the following proclamation of emergency by the President of India, dated the 25th of June in 1975, is published for general information. The proclamation of emergency, in exercise of the powers conferred by Clause 1 of Article 352 of the Constitution, I, Fakhruddin Ali Ahmed, President of India, by this proclamation declare that a grave emergency exists whereby the security of India is threatened by internal disturbance. So can you tell me what internal disturbance they were referring to?
In the Mrs. Gandhi was the third Prime Minister of India. So she came to power in 1967. And in 1971, she fought her the second term. Around that time, India waged a war against Pakistan and liberated Bangladesh, if you know that
was
part
in
of
the
the history.
1971.
1971, when Bangladesh was formed.
Okay.
India intervened and for good reason, and was instrumental in forming Bangladesh at that point in time. Yeah. And she, at the back of it, she was very, very popular at that time. And she had really took in that first part of her first term, so to say, of her prime ministership, some quite radical step in terms of reforming the economy. India wasn't, and another big one that she took was what was known as the Green Revolution, where there were some massive irrigation projects and
up north in
up north in
Haryana,
Punjab,
yeah.
in North India. But by 1973, approximately, her government was riddled with hyperinflation, corruption, unemployment. These sort of issues came up, and there was a nationwide movement that was started by a gentleman called Jai Prakash Narayan, who was a Gandhian politician.
Yeah.
And it was called Sarbodaya movement, which was largely student movement.
Yeah.
And there were lots of strikes, like the National Railway strike, etc., that went on for about a couple of years together.
Okay.
And on the side, the immediate motivation for her was, she used to stand from the constituency for her parliamentary seat was in a place called Rai Beruli, which is in Uttar Pradesh. And she'd been, standing there and being elected, And her rival, who was from the Socialist Party, a gentleman called Raj Narayan, he had brought a case in the Allahabad High Court. This is happening, say, around 73 or so, challenging that election that she had carried out some electoral malpractices.
Right.
And in 1975, sometimes in early June, the High Court ruled against her.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. So, and it was very trivial in the sense that there were 12 items in that court case, and they found two, and the judge found her guilty of two technical offenses, and they're very funny. One of them was that she addressed a gathering from a rostrum which is higher than that is prescribed by a foot or something, And the second one was, I think, his election agent, a gentleman called Yashpal Kapoor, who was his personal secretary. He used to be in a government role. Now, as per the Indian electoral law, if you joined and become an electoral agent of a candidate, you got to quit. You cannot be in a government service.
So you're talking about Indira Gandhi's personal
secretary, who ultimately became personal secretary. At the time of election, he was her election agent.
Right.
So Mr. Kapoor was in government employment. He resigned, but by the time he started he was in his notice period, let us put it. So he resigned, but he started before that 3-month period expired or something. So a very trivial thing. And the High Court allowed her to go to Supreme Court and appeal. So probably had she gone there, she would have won it anyway. But
they were just trying to challenge her.
And the movement, the opposition, who were in the there was a big movement going on anyway for the reasons I just said. They demanded. There was a huge rally in Boat Club in Delhi and demanded her resignation and all that. So there was a bit of a turmoil going on. So I think based on the advice from her, close group, etc., she, rather than going into an arbitration process with the Supreme Court, which could go 50-50, she took the safer path of declaring emergency and she, by that time, she was quite fed up with the way she was cornered. So on 25th of June, essentially, and I remember this being a school student at the time. I was in high school, and the next day when the newspaper came out, this is in Calcutta, and there were these large sections of the front page was blackened out because there was press censorship there. And in Delhi,
so immediately,
this was on 25th June evening.
Yeah.
So it was declared on 25th of June. Ratified on 26th of June. So on 26th of June, when the press, the papers are coming out, they have got these blackened portions because the, censorship has occurred, And in fact, I'm pretty sure what I'm saying is correct. In Delhi, all the newspaper offices, powers were shut, so they couldn't. There were no editions.
They couldn't be printed either.
In Delhi.
In Delhi.
In
Right.
Calcutta, I remember we came out, but there were these black
Imagine,
strips on
yeah.
the front page.
So the state of emergency, why do you think she declared that in the end? Did she want the power? Was it
Yeah,
because of the
absolutely. I think in the balance that would have been the primary motivation.
Yeah.
And apart from that, I think power sort of makes you megalomaniac in a way, doesn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
that is history has shown,
Yeah.
and she was no different to
Yeah.
that.
So you've already started touching on this. So what exactly then went down? So you've touched on the censorship of press. What else happened? What else did she bring in?
Yeah. Basically, the other thing that happened on 25th of June was also that the entire opposition leaders, all of them,
All of them.
all except for RSS, which is as you know, the Hindu nationalist,
Yeah.
Hindu nationalist
For
party,
lack of a better
Sangh,
word, yeah.
and cult. Except for them, entire political spectrum from left to the right, and the center, and they were all put
in prison.
there. Yeah,
That's interesting because anytime you look up a headline, that's the one that comes up first.
Yes.
And it lists leaders basically across the board.
spectrum. All the top leaders were
Yeah,
put into
like
jail,
JP.
but they were they were there in the in a proper prisons. But what at the back of it, thousands upon thousands of people were made political prisoners, and the Indian Constitution didn't allow that. You cannot put people in jail. I mean, it's in any democracy, you have to bring in charge.
Yeah.
To get around that, they brought in an ordinance called MISA, which is called Maintenance of Internal Security Act. Something like that.
Okay.
Yeah, MISA. It's a draconian rule where you can sort of keep people in prison without bringing in charge for a period of, I think, 6 months.
Wow.
And then, so that's a long, long time. And so, so that was quite
So
interesting.
were all the political leaders in jail for 6 months?
More than that. They were only released on 18th of January. Yeah, 18th of 77 when she lifted the emergency.
Oh, okay. So everybody else was in jail until that time.
Until that time, yeah.
So, and you said that there was thousands of people who were also incarcerated. What thousands of people?
So these people are initially. So emergency are. If you go into that phase, when the emergency is declared, the first part is mainly the civil liberties. So no strikes. Okay.
So you can't have strike action. Yeah.
Yeah. So you can. So all those demonstration and strikes that were going on, they were put, immediately.
Right.
Stop. The leaders are taken in. The political activists are put into.
So the activists are taken in. Yeah.
There's a press censorship.
Yep.
So these are the main effects that we felt in the first 6 odd months.
Right.
And that's when, it's very interestingly, people actually especially in big cities, in the middle class, is virtually supported the measures.
Cool.
Because trains suddenly started running on time. All the government offices, were functioning, that kind of thing. So there was a shock through the system, and people liked it.
Yeah.
The other excesses that happen, and that's possibly more to do what you'd see in the play, which are to do with the excesses that affected millions of possibly people, to the general masses, happened more 6 to 8 months into the emergency. So initial part was more to do with the liberties and the political side of things, whereas those excesses came in later. We can talk more about that.
So you already again started touching on the fact of how people were reacting to it. So the general public, who are, say, not related to political activism or the middle class you touched upon, like they're at this stage they're quite like, okay, yeah, the trains are working and the government servants are coming to work on time. What else and who else was affected? And what are the other ways that the populace was affected?
Well, in terms of, if you're talking about the population first.
Yeah.
The population, I mean, if you're talking about so if you break it down in terms of the population, the middle class and upper class, upper middle class people, possibly they supported and they were hardly affected
Right.
by these
Right.
measures.
In fact, as you say, they might be in support, yeah.
They were
Yeah.
supportive of these things.
Because suddenly things are running like clockwork.
Yeah,
and,
exactly.
Yeah.
And the poor people in the first phases, they are virtually they're carrying on with their daily doldrums that they're used to, and this you see in the play as well.
Yeah.
But 6 or 8 months into it, when Mrs. Gandhi, this is another twist to it. So Mrs. Gandhi has brought in younger son,
Yeah.
Sanjay Gandhi,
Yeah.
and who's been groomed to be the next prime minister very clearly. So he's an upstart, and he identifies he's got this what is called the 5-point program, and his mother, as in the prime minister, has got what is infamous
The
20-point
program,
program.
yeah.
We forget about the 5-point program, which is much more draconian actually, and which mostly
Which were
affected
introduced,
by the son.
Yeah.
And one of them was the family planning issue,
Right.
and the other one was which is part of the 20-point program, which is called the Garibi Hatao, and I will translate that, ridding India of poverty.
Remove
poverty. So Sanjay Gandhi picked on the remove poverty from his mother's 20-point program, and his interpretation by removing poverty, I'll remove these slums from the streets of
Right.
Delhi. And
So kind of took it to the other extreme.
Absolutely.
Like
other
literally getting rid of these people who
Yes,
sit here.
Yeah. And his another passion was that India had a population problem, which India had.
Continues to have.
Yeah, continues to have. But his antidote to that was to carry out, the sterilization program, as they call it, And so the first effect of it in the urban centers was in Delhi, a place called Turkmen Gate, which is near Old Delhi, near the Red Fort.
Yeah.
And there was a huge slum, largely Muslim population. And they cleared the entire slum. There were
So they
protests.
just bulldozed the whole slum.
Bulldozed, absolutely.
And what did they do with the people that were there?
They removed them and they moved to
they
another
just-
settlement outside Delhi. So,
So they just literally got rid of the eyesore.
Yeah, so you move them 50 kilometers away or 20 kilometers away,
Right.
another in
Did they
settlements.
resettle them properly, or was it just like you no longer can stay here, so you have to go? And we
Yeah, I
have
mean,
bulldozed you?
you're giving you this kind of land, you can make your own
Oh, so they
stuff.
did give them land.
Yeah, I think so. That's how I remember it. Yeah, yeah. Largely gets, those, they were not properly settled. That is very, very clearly established. But how man to man they were dealt with is not very clear.
Oh, okay.
But definitely not dealt with properly.
Right.
That's
And
for sure.
this was one part. Then you spoke about the sterilization. So tell us
That is
more
the
about
next
that.
one. That is the next one that that had, that was really, whereas the slum clearance was mostly in the bigger cities, the sterilization program was, they were enacted throughout the country, especially in the rural hinterland,
Right.
and that had an enormous, effect. And what, in terms of the play or the book, it travels through, it starts slightly before the emergency and goes on until
Slightly
well
after.
after.
Yeah. Well after.
Yeah. So in the play, you would notice that the in the initial phases, the tailors, Ishwar and Om, they're talking about about the emergency.
Yeah.
And they're saying, there's something going on politically. It really doesn't
don't
affect
know,
them.
yeah.
We have to
Yeah.
look for our bread.
So then we can assume that they're kind of in that first 6 months period.
Yeah, that's the first 6 months period. And in that parallelly, you see Dina, and she's already in the business. She's not met Ishwar and Om, but she's going to, what's her name, Mrs. Gupta, who's the business owner. That she's the exporter, basically.
Yeah.
She's talking about the emergency, how things are shaping up. Mrs. Gandhi has, implemented, and things are now moving. The rule of law is happening, no more strikes, etc.
Yeah.
And which we see in Nuswan, Dina's, and they are representative of that middle class section that we just spoke about, and we see that happening.
The business upper middle class, sort of like who are benefiting from this.
Yeah, and then in the latter part of the play, as Ishwar and Om, when they are working for Dina, and then initially they slum, where the slum clearance happens, right? So
that's featured in the play.
In the play,
beautification of
beautification
the area.
of the city.
Yeah.
That part we see, and then they lose their home, and and their life starts, gets more entrenched with Dina's life, and they started staying in Dina's place. Then, when they go back to the village for Om's marriage, and that's when you see not only the at a certain level, which we see that potency peddler, for instance, when and he's actually, and that's very common in the potency peddler, that used to happen as a cultural thing, and you find them in various people. These are little, and they're
just
actual
con artists,
and they're great salesmen.
So these are all these wonderfully colorful characters that we meet at the market, but something really awful happens to them when they go to that rural setting, like you were talking about. So that's where we start to see the strata of society being affected by the sterilization part of.
Yeah, absolutely. The idea was voluntary, and if you do vasectomy,
you get a radio.
No, you get 200 rupees or a radio or whatever. There were some prize,
some incentives.
Incentive, okay. So that initially it didn't had many takers. That's when, because they were not hitting the numbers, and to please the higher ups. And it was, also politically, it was given that bit of licensing.
So they had like mandated quotas.
That you got to sort of do. More you do, you have, for the politicians, maybe the village politicians, the motivation could be a ticket for the next election.
Right.
So he is implementing that, and the police could be the, you have the, a bit of money from the politicians flowing through. For the bureaucrats could be the KPI that he won't be transferred to an awkward place if he's hitting the number.
Yeah.
So these incentives were being created, and that formed the nexus.
And without giving up too much for the people who haven't read the novel, we don't want to give up its ending. But so it leads to some things, and then they go back to their lives, and they have changed dramatically afterwards. How did it affect the sort of the characters which are Dina and above, or Nuswan? Did they get anything else? Did they see any negative effects, or did they feel anything different too?
See, what happened also was that when the focus shifted to India being a democracy, it's the resilience of the country. I think you would find that we all got used to it. I can remember that bit. Say, what should I say? Because in latter part of 1976, I'm in the university, and in that last 6 months, so I start university in July 76, and the emergency got lifted in January 77. So let us say about 6 months. Those 6 months, on our day-to-day life, I think everybody got used to
to it.
what trains are already started, gone back to their usual routine, that kind of thing. It fizzled out.
Yeah.
And the hawkers are coming back to the street.
Right.
That kind of stuff is happening in the city.
Yeah.
Whereas these extreme excesses are happening
In
in
the
the
rural
rural
areas,
area. I still remember going to, as part of our university, the first year thing, we had a thing called NSS, which is
Yeah.
called the National Service Scheme, where the students are supposed to do some volunteering work in the villages. So we go to a camp in the village, and we are
Yeah.
put up in a health center kind of thing,
Yeah.
which is, there's got some living quarters surrounding it. And we are doing,
So
innocent
volunteer.
stuff like, chicken pox vaccination and stuff like that. And in the evening, we find these people, there are these, there's a little surgery room in that health center. And literally, I still remember that man moaning, and he's been brought in, you could feel it. He's been brought in for
A vasectomy.
vasectomy.
Oh my
And
God.
it's been done, and he didn't want to do it because he's crying.
Yeah.
So this is vivid in my memory. This is around October, November.
Wow.
So you come back to the city, you don't feel
really
that,
feel
you're
anything
totally
at all.
removed.
That's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
it's such a vast country that sometimes you have all these excessive things happening and you don't even feel it on the other side. It's-
Oblivious. And in the play also, you see,
Yeah,
in the
you
end,
do.
towards the end, isn't it? In this
Yeah.
one, is saying, she needs to come up with some new things.
Yeah.
These things are not,
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
have got used to
They're so
it.
removed, the
Yeah,
far
yeah,
removed. Like
so
the rich are really rich and the poor are really poor, and
Absolutely.
the extremes are quite extreme, aren't they? Like, yeah, it's a
It's a total disconnect, I think, in terms of.
yeah.
I think that's human nature, and you can translate that into in larger societies across the world. There is this total disconnect from, the circle, this societal context that you're living in. You're almost living in a bubble, and you don't care what is happening
Yeah.
outside it.
And even if
know?
you do, because we, in ours, even if the upper middle class kind of like have interactions with the other classes because they're service providers of some description, like irons, cleans, that kind of stuff. But what you're describing is that the rural aspect, which is actually like distance in kilometers, and you really, there's no news traveling, or maybe it's different now, I don't know, but
Yeah, I mean, those days,
there's no internet now.
No.
In the 70s. So,
Yeah.
so it's really hard to imagine that news would have traveled at all.
But I can tell you that even today, I think it's, it is worse. It won't be, and people wouldn't care. I think, in a way, the middle class, that the slum. I mean, I couldn't believe it. But then, the people, people that we know perfectly, all right. This is our, around us. The slums being cleared, people are saying, that's nice, so that's the right thing to do.
And it's not something. It's not something that was isolated, because I remember even growing up not so long ago when in Delhi, and the slums kept getting moved off the streets, or constantly, and they just came back, and they just got cleared again, and they just came back, and they just got cleared. Like, this is a cycle. I feel like it doesn't stop, but every time there is something that the political leader decides that, we need to make the city pretty. It's like, let's just take all these poor people and put them somewhere they can't live, really. Then they will come back.
And the
in a couple of
comeback
years.
part is quite important, because if you look at a totalitarian society like, say, China, for instance, they just ask you to sort of just go.
Yeah.
You think about the Chinese development model. They resettle. I mean, it's a slightly different story. But then again, they won't ask the people whether you want to move or not.
Yeah.
And the moving back is not an option at all.
I mean, I don't know if they get the option to move back in India either. They just do.
Yeah.
And that's the resilience that we kind of, the hope that the play potentially wants to leave us with is that resilience of the people and hope.
There are certain positive things that happen due to emergency, in terms of I'm just talking about the political democracy here. And Firstly, 1977, when the emergency is lifted, and she's in his supreme confidence, she declares an election. She didn't have done that, but she did it. And the opposition, who were behind the jail together, and they formed a united front. So, and there's a opposition government in power in, I think it was March or April, I can't remember, in 77.
So she
loses the election.
She loses that election that she calls because she's super confident that she's gonna.
Yeah.
Okay.
She loses the election. The new government comes into play, and that was the first time India became free in 1947
since
independence
from the British.
Yeah, so after 30 years, the first government, non-Congress government, comes to power.
Right.
So Indian democracy becomes, I think, in a way more mature.
More mature, yeah.
And and then
kind of reaches adulthood.
Adulthood.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And that government, sort of fizzles out in 3 years because these are disparate groups of various political belief. And she comes back in power. She comes back to power in 3 years in 1980. But within that 3 years, that government, that opposition government, passes. The first thing that they attacked was on correcting the constitution.
Okay.
So it brings in what is a very, very important amendment to the constitution called 44th Amendment, which makes, earlier, as you read from that gazette, it said internal disturbances or something.
Yeah, India is threatened by internal
disturbance. So that was not possible.
Right.
So you cannot declare emergency based on just internal disturbances.
Right.
It has to be violent uprising.
Violent uprising. Okay.
Uprising, that is the criteria, and has to be passed by 2/3 majority in both houses.
Right. Good.
Which is again, another backstop. So that
just checks and balances.
And so it has become quite. And
quite robust.
Quite robust. So, as you know, in India, in the last 5 years, we are going through an election now, isn't it, in India? So, last 5 years, the BJP, which is the Hindu nationalist government in power, and given a choice, possibly they would have loved to.
They would have squeezed it, for all its worth.
But it's not possible for them to sort of do. So that's a positive thing, I think. By the way, I just want another interesting fact in that amendment, 44th Amendment, which is happening between 1977 and 1980, right? So in those three years. And she, in 1977, she lost her own seat in Raebareli, which was a shock. To her. But she fought another election in south of India.
Okay.
In a place called Chikmagalur, which is in Karnataka. And she became an MP, and she comes back to the parliament, and she votes for the 44th Amendment, as in, which makes an emergency.
So she kind of assumes that the opposition will try and do it.
Or, she has a change of heart, or she goes with the political feeling or the popular feeling at that point in time, because by then these excesses have become really, really very, very well known, So the mood.
Whatever happens to Sanjay Gandhi?
He dies. 1980, she comes back. So 1980, there is another election. She comes back to power. And Sanjay Gandhi is, he is on the party side, he's the second in command kind of thing. But he dies of a plane accident. So he was a pilot,
Right.
So not pilot, meaning he used to fly in a small aircraft and all that. So and he died of
an accident.
Just about 500 yards from her mother's home. That's where the plane crashed. So that happened, and in her that term in 1980, there was a separatist movement in Punjab by the Sikh, which is called the Khalistan movement. They wanted an independent state for the Sikh people. So that got quite out of hand. It was a violent movement, and to cut a long story short, she took the decision of sending the troops into the Golden Temple, where these terrorists were, holed in, and that created a bit damage to the holy shrine, so to say, and
And that eventually led to her assassination. So
yeah,
that
she had
really
her
brought
her
reign down.
own bodyguards
Bodyguard, yeah.
who were Sikh soldiers, and she was advised to change them,
Change
but
them.
she refused to do that. That is again her supreme confidence,
Yeah.
and she's gunned down one morning. I think it was 31st of October, 1984 or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. With the current situation in government in India, do you think we could have had another emergency had the 44th Amendment not been brought into place?
Yeah, I mean, you cannot deny that Mr. Modi, who is the current prime minister, he's also quite a strong personality, like Mrs.
Megalomaniac.
Like Mrs. Gandhi, and
Yeah.
I think he has those similar tendencies, and given a choice. Had those 44th Amendment, which we spoke about, to create those checks and balances, my guess is that he would have done that, or he would put into similar pressure kind of situation. He would do, love to do, bring
Yeah.
in another emergency.
If we were to summarize the legacy of Mrs. Gandhi based on the period of emergency, how would you go about that? What motivated her?
The motivation definitely was, like probably any person with dictatorial tendency would have that. He or she knows what is best for the people that
Yeah.
he or she rules, and that goes with power as well. Because she was, if you look back, she was losing control of the situation, and she was really politically put into a corner, and her way of reacting was bringing back control. And that's where these things about discipline, work is ethics, work is religion, and those sort of slogans were created, and and that I think, yeah, that is power and control that was there in her heart. Maybe she
Yeah.
thought that's the best she could do for the Indian
Yeah.
people.
But the consequences of that, she probably didn't fully actualize in her head, as to how deeply how far Sanjay could take that.
Yes.
In the
You mean
negative
about in terms of the
sense,
excesses?
in the
Yes.
excesses.
Yeah, I think she got inkling, and I don't think she took much notice initially how far it stretched. Reason why I say this, because when she lifts the emergency, there's no apparent reason, because things are settled down. There's no pressure. There's no political opposition. Yet she, one fine morning, she declares, and the son learns it from the radio announcement on the All India radio. So which tells us that she lost confidence in her son to a certain extent. And I don't think, because as I said, I mean, that family planning business, the sterilization business, was not part of those 20 points.
20-point program, yeah.
Yeah, it's more of the 5-point program of Sanjay.
Cool. Hey, Uncle, thank you so much for chatting to us. And that was really quite educational. And and hopefully when people come and watch the show, they'll be more informed having having heard this. And thanks for your time, and thank you for listening.
Thank you.